Good evening, and welcome to Vanguard News. Tonight, we stand at a precipice, facing not just a single crisis, but a confluence of global shocks converging into a potentially catastrophic, perfect storm. Are we truly prepared for the economic earthquake that may be about to erupt? We are witnessing the alarming escalation of trade wars, no longer isolated disputes, but now resembling the ominous drumbeats of a wider economic conflict, a conflict that threatens to unravel decades of global integration and prosperity. And superimposed upon this volatile trade landscape, we face a global food crisis, dramatically intensified by the tragic war in Ukraine, pushing millions towards hunger and desperation. But are these seemingly disparate crises, trade and food, truly separate, or are they deeply interconnected, feeding off each other and amplifying the threat to global stability? Tonight, Vanguard News pulls back the curtain, going beyond the superficial headlines to reveal the deep and dangerous interconnections between these global forces. We will dissect the intricate mechanisms by which escalating trade wars and a looming food crisis are intertwining to fuel unprecedented migratory waves and threaten to destabilize nations and regions across the globe. We will analyze the nation-by-nation impact, trace the global ripple effects, and confront the uncomfortable question: are we witnessing the dawn of a new era of economic and geopolitical instability, and what can be done to navigate this perilous new reality? Welcome to Vanguard News, where we provide you with the Vanguard analysis, the forward-looking perspective, and the critical insights you need to understand and prepare for the challenges of this uncertain new world order. Join us as we confront the looming global perfect storm. Vanguard News now sharpens its focus to dissect the specific competitive advantages of each major player in this escalating trade war: the United States, Canada, Mexico, China, and the European Union, and to analyze how these carefully cultivated strengths are directly threatened by the unfolding tariff battles. Understanding these nation-specific vulnerabilities is crucial to grasping the potential long-term fallout of this global trade disruption. But the critical question is, are these nations fully aware of the self-inflicted wounds they risk by engaging in this escalating conflict? Let's examine each case. For decades, the U.S. competitive advantage has rested not solely on manufacturing prowess, but on innovation, technology, services, and high-value agricultural exports. Key U.S. export sectors include technology and intellectual property, software, semiconductors, aircraft, pharmaceuticals, financial services, entertainment, high-value-added sectors driven by innovation. Agriculture, soybeans, corn, beef, wheat, efficient large-scale agriculture, feeding global markets. Energy, oil, natural gas, coal, those shifting landscape. Impact of trade war. U.S. tariffs, while ostensibly aimed at protecting domestic manufacturing, risk undermining these very strengths. Retaliatory tariffs from China, Canada, Mexico, and the EU directly target U.S. agricultural exports, soybeans, beef, etc., hurting American farmers and rural economies. Higher import costs on components and materials due to tariffs increase costs for U.S. manufacturers, eroding their competitiveness, even domestically. The technology sector, while seemingly less directly tariffed in this initial round, is heavily reliant on global supply chains and international talent. Trade uncertainty and damaged international relationships discourage foreign investment in U.S. innovation and potentially hinder access to global markets for U.S. tech products and services. The America First approach, ironically, risks isolating U.S. innovation from the global ecosystem and weakening its long-term competitive edge in high-value sectors. But will this strategy ultimately backfire, eroding the very innovation edge that has been the cornerstone of U.S. economic power? Canada's competitive strengths are deeply rooted in its abundant natural resources and its highly integrated trade relationship with the United States. Key Canadian export sectors include energy, crude oil, natural gas, electricity, a major energy supplier to the U.S., natural resources and commodities, lumber, minerals, potash, agricultural products, automotive and manufacturing, integrated with U.S. auto parts, vehicles, other manufactured goods, deeply intertwined supply chains with the U.S., particularly in automotive. Impact of trade war. Canada is exceptionally vulnerable to U.S. tariffs due to its dependence on the U.S. market and the highly integrated nature of North American supply chains. U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods directly threaten key export sectors like energy and automotive. Even a 10% tariff on oil imports raises costs for U.S. consumers, but more significantly, it reduces demand for Canadian oil, hurting the Canadian energy sector. Retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods will further damage the highly integrated automotive sector, impacting manufacturing on both sides of the border. Canada's economy, heavily reliant on exports to the U.S., faces significant headwinds and potential recessionary pressures if this trade war escalates. While Canada has promised forceful retaliation, its economic leverage is limited compared to the sheer size of the U.S. market, making it a particularly vulnerable player in this conflict. But in the face of this pressure, could Canada strategically pivot to diversify its trade relationships and lessen its dependence on the U.S., potentially forging stronger ties with other global partners? Mexico's competitive strength lies in its strategic location, NAFTA/USMCA trade agreements, and its emergence as a manufacturing hub for North America, combined with significant agricultural exports. Key Mexican export sectors: manufacturing, automobiles, auto parts, electronics, appliances, leveraging lower labor costs and proximity to the U.S. market. Agriculture, avocados, vegetables, fruits, beer, major supplier of agricultural products to the U.S. Oil and energy. While less dominant than Canada, still a significant energy exporter. Impact of trade war. Mexico faces a double blow. U.S. tariffs directly target both its manufacturing and agricultural export sectors. A 25% tariff on Mexican goods makes Mexican-made products significantly more expensive in the U.S. market, potentially shifting manufacturing investment away from Mexico to other lower-cost regions, or back to the U.S., if that goal is even achievable. The 25% tariff on avocados is a highly visible example of the direct impact on Mexican agricultural exporters and U.S. consumers. Beyond tariffs, the threat of border closures or disruptions linked to immigration concerns further undermines Mexico's attractiveness as a reliable manufacturing and trade partner. The Mexican economy, deeply intertwined with the U.S., is highly susceptible to contagion from a U.S.-China-Canada-Mexico trade war and faces significant economic and political challenges in navigating this volatile landscape. But could this crisis become an unexpected catalyst for Mexico to accelerate its own economic diversification and perhaps strengthen its economic ties within Latin America, reducing its reliance on North American trade? China's competitive advantage is its vast, efficient, and highly diversified manufacturing capacity, combined with a rapidly growing domestic market and increasing technological prowess. Key Chinese export sectors: manufacturing, diverse and scale electronics, textiles, apparel, machinery, consumer goods, components, unparalleled scale and cost competitiveness across a vast range of manufactured goods. Technology, rising telecommunications equipment, Huawei, consumer electronics, AI, and increasingly sophisticated technology sectors. Impact of trade war. While U.S. tariffs are intended to curb China's economic rise and manufacturing dominance, China possesses significant adaptability and strategic depth. As the report notes, Chinese companies are already relocating production to Southeast Asia to circumvent tariffs. China's massive domestic market provides a buffer against reduced exports, and its Belt and Road Initiative expands its trade and influence beyond traditional Western markets. Retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods allow China to target politically sensitive U.S. sectors like agriculture and aerospace, exerting pressure on the U.S. administration. While China may experience short-term economic pain from the trade war, in the long run, it could emerge stronger and more strategically independent, accelerating its shift towards domestic consumption and strengthening its trade ties with other regions, particularly within Asia and across the developing world. The trade war may inadvertently accelerate China's ascent as a global economic and technological superpower, rather than containing it. So, Is this trade war truly a strategic miscalculation, inadvertently empowering the very rival it seeks to contain? The EU's competitive strength lies in its highly skilled workforce, advanced manufacturing capabilities, strong brands, and its vast, integrated internal market. Key EU export sectors: high-value manufacturing, automobiles, German brands, machinery, pharmaceuticals, luxury goods, chemicals, focus on quality, innovation, and high-end products. Services: financial services, tourism, cultural exports, strong service-based economies within the EU. Impact of trade war. The EU, though geographically removed from the initial North American tariff escalations, is directly threatened by the prospect of U.S. tariffs on EU goods. Such tariffs would target key EU export sectors like automobiles and luxury goods, significantly impacting major European economies like Germany. Retaliatory tariffs from the EU on U.S. goods are virtually guaranteed, further escalating transatlantic trade tensions. Beyond direct tariffs, the uncertainty and instability created by a global trade war undermine the EU's export-dependent economic model and its commitment to rules-based multilateral trade. Internal divisions within the EU on trade policy could be exacerbated by external pressures. While the EU is a powerful economic bloc, a protracted trade war with the US, coupled with other geopolitical challenges, could weaken its economic dynamism and erode its global influence, potentially further fragmenting the Western-led global order. Facing this external pressure and potential weakening of the transatlantic alliance, will the EU be forced to accelerate its own strategic autonomy agenda, potentially reshaping its global role and alliances? Vanguard News now analyzes the systemic impact of these tariffs on the fragile architecture of global commerce and the looming threat of a full-scale economic war. The fundamental economic reality, often overlooked in political rhetoric, is that tariffs are, in their essence, a tax ultimately levied on consumers and businesses within the very nation imposing them. While politicians may frame tariffs as punitive measures against foreign countries, is this framing accurate, or does it obscure a more complex and potentially self-damaging reality? The economic burden, in practice, invariably shifts to domestic consumers and businesses through increased prices for imported goods and components. These increased costs are then transmitted throughout the supply chain, impacting everything from manufacturing input costs to retail prices, ultimately fueling inflation and dampening consumer demand. But to what extent will this inflationary pressure truly impact household budgets, and could it trigger a significant slowdown in consumer spending, the engine of many economies? This inflationary pressure, if sustained, can force central banks to raise interest rates to combat inflation, further cooling down economic growth and potentially triggering recessionary pressures. Are we, therefore, potentially witnessing the early stages of a policy-induced economic slowdown, fueled by trade protectionism? The escalation of tariffs, targeting Canada, Mexico, China, and potentially the EU, represents a systemic shock to the global trading system. Decades of trade liberalization, built on the principle of reducing trade barriers and fostering interconnected global commerce under the WTO framework, are now being challenged by a resurgence of protectionist policies. But is this resurgence of protectionism a temporary aberration, or does it signal a more fundamental shift away from globalization and towards a new era of economic nationalism? This reversal towards protectionism carries significant risks. Firstly, it undermines the predictability and stability of global trade, creating uncertainty for businesses and discouraging long-term investment. Companies are less likely to invest in cross-border supply chains and international expansion when trade relationships are subject to sudden political shifts and tariff impositions. Will this uncertainty lead to a significant contraction in global foreign direct investment, further hindering economic growth? Secondly, protectionism can lead to retaliatory cycles and tit-for-tat tariff escalations as nations respond to each other's trade barriers in a spiraling conflict. Could this tit-for-tat escalation spiral out of control, triggering a full-blown trade war, despite the potential for widespread economic damage? And if so, what would be the point of no return? This can rapidly descend into a full-blown trade war, where global trade flows are severely disrupted and economic growth is stifled worldwide. The 1930s and the disastrous global economic consequences of protectionist policies during the Great Depression serve as a stark historical warning of the dangers of escalating trade conflicts. Are we, in the 21st century, in danger of repeating the mistakes of the past, failing to learn the lessons of history? Furthermore, the report correctly points out the potential for U.S. economic self-harm. While the rhetoric of protectionism often focuses on revitalizing domestic industry, the reality is that U.S. industry, in many sectors, is no longer globally competitive without access to efficient global supply chains and specialized labor. Decades of globalization have shifted manufacturing and supply chain expertise to other regions, particularly Asia. The U.S. industrial base, in many areas, has indeed become oxidized or atrophied, and its labor force, while highly skilled in many areas, may not be as cost-competitive or possess the specific skill sets needed to immediately replace globalized supply chains across all sectors. Attempting to force a rapid reshoring of industry through protectionist measures could lead to higher production costs, reduced competitiveness for U.S. companies in global markets, and ultimately, a cooling down of the U.S. economy itself, rather than a revitalization. Is the pursuit of industrial revitalization through protectionism therefore a misguided strategy, potentially weakening the U.S. economy in the long run, rather than strengthening it? Finally, we must consider the specter of economic warfare. If trade disputes escalate beyond tariffs and into broader economic sanctions, technology restrictions, and financial warfare, the consequences could be far more severe than simple price increases. Are we sleepwalking into an era of economic warfare, where trade becomes just another battlefield in geopolitical competition? A full-scale economic war between major global powers could fragment the global economy into competing blocs, disrupt financial markets, and unleash unpredictable geopolitical instability. Vanguard News will be closely monitoring the rhetoric and actions of all involved nations for signs of further escalation beyond tariffs, and the potential for a descent into a truly global economic conflict with far-reaching and long-lasting consequences. What are the early warning signs of this potential descent into economic warfare, and how can we, as informed citizens, recognize and respond to these escalating risks? Vanguard News now investigates the intimate connection between protectionist trade policies and international migratory waves, a nexus that could redefine global population flows in the coming decades. 1. Your insightful question strikes at the heart of the matter. Could these escalating trade wars, by their very nature, become engines of migration, driving people across borders in search of economic survival? Is this an unintended consequence that policymakers have failed to fully grasp? We delve into this crucial link. The causal mechanism is direct and alarming. Trade wars, initiated with the imposition of tariffs, raise the cost of imported goods. These tariffs are not abstract figures. They are, as we have seen, taxes ultimately paid by domestic consumers. When a country imposes a 25% tariff, the economic impact ripples outwards, directly affecting households. This additional cost inevitably translates into higher prices for the consumer, hitting essential items in the basic household basket. But how much of this increased cost will be absorbed by businesses, and how much will be passed directly to consumers, further squeezing already tight budgets? The purchasing power of households is reduced, especially for low- and middle-income families, generating significant internal economic pressure. Could this economic pressure become the breaking point for vulnerable populations, forcing them to consider migration as a last resort? In parallel, trade wars trigger unemployment. Exporting companies in countries targeted by tariffs face reduced access to key markets like the U.S. This decrease in external demand creates a domino effect: reduced production, hiring freezes, and ultimately layoffs. But is the promise of reshoring jobs to the tariff-imposing nation a realistic outcome, or will automation and globalized supply chains make significant job creation an elusive goal, even with protectionist measures? In interconnected sectors, unemployment ripples outwards. Even within the tariff-imposing nation, certain industries reliant on imported inputs or facing retaliatory tariffs can suffer job losses. Could these job losses offset any potential gains from protectionism, leading to a net negative impact on employment overall? This cocktail of high living costs and unemployment creates a powerful push factor for migration. When families face economic hardship and dwindling prospects at home, what choices do they truly have? When basic needs go unmet and survival is at stake, is migration not just a choice, but an act of economic necessity? The search for better opportunities, higher wages, and a more manageable cost of living intensifies, driving people to cross borders in search of a viable future. In the specific case of Latin America and migration to the United States, trade wars could act as a significant accelerant of existing migratory trends. If the economies of Mexico and other Latin American nations, already facing numerous challenges, are further weakened by trade tensions, could we see a dramatic surge in migration northward, overwhelming border control systems, and creating a humanitarian crisis? The reasons are tragically clear: increased poverty, diminished opportunities, and a bleak economic outlook at home. But is it possible that these trade wars, intended to strengthen national economies, will ironically exacerbate the very migration flows they seek to control, creating a self-defeating policy cycle? It is crucial to understand. Migration is not merely a social issue. It is fundamentally an economic imperative. When economies fail to provide, migration becomes an unavoidable consequence. It is important to note the existing intense migration to the U.S., as you pointed out. Factors beyond economics, violence, instability, climate change already play a role. But trade wars would be a powerful economic amplifier, adding fuel to an already burning fire. Will these trade wars become the tipping point, pushing already strained migration systems to the breaking point? They would not be the sole cause, but a significant economic catalyst intensifying existing trends and potentially triggering unprecedented migratory waves. Beyond the US and Latin America, could these economic push factors reshape global migration patterns entirely? If living costs surge in tariff-affected economies and unemployment rises, will we witness new migration corridors emerging, with people seeking refuge and opportunity in regions less impacted by trade conflict? Countries with more stable economies and lower inflation could become magnets for economic migrants, redrawing the map of global human mobility. However, we must maintain perspective. Is it possible that we are oversimplifying the complex tapestry of migration? Migration is not solely driven by economics. Political, social, and personal factors also play a significant, intertwined role. Trade wars are one more economic thread in this complex tapestry, but their specific weight and impact will vary depending on a multitude of contextual factors, including destination country policies and unforeseen geopolitical events. The question remains: how significantly will these economic pressures amplify existing migration flows, and what will be the long-term human cost? In summary, Vanguard News concludes that trade wars present a very real and worrying potential to dramatically intensify international migratory waves. By driving up living costs and triggering unemployment, these tensions create powerful economic push factors, forcing people to seek survival elsewhere. This phenomenon could exacerbate existing migration to destinations like the US, particularly from Latin America, and fundamentally reshape global migration patterns in the years to come. In our increasingly volatile and interconnected world, protectionist trade policies, intended to bolster national economies, may inadvertently unleash profound and far-reaching social and humanitarian consequences, chief among them, accelerated human mobility in a desperate search for economic security. Vanguard News will continue to monitor this critical intersection of trade, economics, and migration, seeking to understand the challenges and anticipate the trends that will define the future of human mobility in an increasingly uncertain and interconnected world. But the ultimate question remains: can global leaders recognize the profound human cost of these economic conflicts and choose a path of cooperation and shared prosperity, rather than escalating trade wars and their devastating human consequences? The answer, unfortunately, remains deeply uncertain. Vanguard News now centers its attention on what we can call the North American Energy Triangle, the intricate dance of oil and energy between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. This vital trade flow, often unseen in the broader trade war narrative, is now directly in the line of fire. One astutely pointed out a key nuance. It's not just about U.S. oil imports. It's about how this trade war can disrupt the entire regional energy ecosystem. But is the strategic importance of this energy triangle fully understood by policymakers? Or are they underestimating the potential for self-inflicted damage through protectionist measures? Let's delve deeper. While it's widely known that Canada is a major oil supplier to the United States and that Mexico is also an oil exporter, the less visible but equally crucial link is Canada's oil sales to Mexico. Mexico, despite its own oil production, finds it economically efficient to import heavier Canadian crude, optimized for certain Mexican refineries, while exporting its lighter crude to other markets, including the U.S. But what happens when tariffs and trade uncertainty throw a wrench into this carefully calibrated system? The United States, in this complex interplay, acts as a de facto North American energy intermediary. Despite being a major oil producer itself, the U.S. has historically benefited from importing oil from both Canada and Mexico, leveraging geographical proximity and the diverse crude oil qualities offered. Simultaneously, the U.S. exports refined petroleum products throughout the region. But could this strategic intermediary role be jeopardized by aggressive trade policies, potentially undermining U.S. energy influence in the region and beyond? How exactly do U.S. tariffs weaponize this energy triangle? The ripple effects are multifaceted and potentially devastating for all involved. Tariffs on Canadian oil, a direct hit to U.S. consumers and a blow to Canadian producers. If the U.S. were to impose tariffs on Canadian oil, even a seemingly modest 10% as mentioned in reports, the immediate impact would be higher crude oil costs for U.S. refineries. This is not just an abstract economic concept. It translates directly to pump prices for American consumers, exacerbating domestic energy inflation. But is the political gain from appearing tough on trade worth the very real economic pain inflicted on American households at the gas pump? Simultaneously, Canada faces a direct economic blow as demand for its oil weakens and export revenues decline, impacting its energy sector and overall economy. Disrupting the Canada-Mexico energy corridor via U.S. policy, the imposition of tariffs, and the pervasive uncertainty of a trade war act as a major disruptor to the established Canada-Mexico energy flow. Even if Mexican refineries aren't directly targeted by U.S. tariffs in this instance, the broader economic instability and supply chain disruptions could force them to reduce their intake of Canadian crude. Could this disruption to regional energy flows inadvertently weaken Mexican refineries and ultimately impact Mexico's own energy security and export capacity? Furthermore, Mexico's ability to export its own refined products could be indirectly undermined by the regional economic slowdown, creating a ripple effect throughout the energy triangle. Regional energy security, the ultimate casualty. The fragmentation of the North American energy market through trade barriers is not just an economic inefficiency, it undermines the very foundation of regional energy security. A truly integrated energy market, built on cooperation and open trade, offers diversification, optimized distribution, and coordinated crisis response. But are these long-term strategic benefits being sacrificed for short-sighted protectionist gains? Trade wars introduce barriers and frictions, hindering coordination and increasing the vulnerability of all three nations to both global and regional energy shocks. In a world of increasing geopolitical instability and energy market volatility, is dismantling regional energy cooperation a strategically sound move? Retaliation in the energy sector, a dangerous escalation. If Canada and Mexico were to retaliate, as is highly likely, could the energy sector become a prime target? Imagine retaliatory tariffs on U.S. exports of refined petroleum products or restrictions on energy infrastructure access. Could we witness a tit-for-tat energy trade war, escalating beyond tariffs and into more damaging measures, further destabilizing the entire North American energy landscape? This would have severe consequences for all three nations. Pipelines as a tangible symbol of interdependence, now under threat. The vast network of pipelines crisscrossing the U.S.-Canada border are more than just infrastructure. They are physical embodiments of decades of deep energy integration and mutual dependence. Tariffs and trade barriers threaten to disrupt these vital arteries of energy flow. Are we willing to jeopardize decades of carefully built energy infrastructure and cooperation for the sake of short-term trade gains, potentially increasing costs and inefficiencies for decades to come? Mexico, too, benefits indirectly from this interconnected pipeline network and a stable, efficient North American energy market. Vanguard News concludes that these trade wars pose a direct and significant threat to the carefully balanced North American energy triangle, with potentially severe consequences for Canada, the US, and Mexico. The imposition of tariffs and the ensuing trade uncertainty risk not only raising energy costs for consumers across the region, but also undermining regional energy security and inflicting lasting damage on all three economies. This intricate energy relationship serves as a powerful illustration of how protectionist policies, far from strengthening nations, can unleash complex disruptions and unintended negative consequences in our deeply interconnected globalized world. But is it too late to reverse course? Can rationality and strategic long-term thinking prevail? Or are we destined to witness the unraveling of decades of North American energy cooperation, replaced by a fragmented and less secure regional energy landscape? The choices made now will have profound and lasting implications for energy security and economic stability across the continent. Vanguard News urges a return to dialogue, cooperation, and a rejection of protectionist measures that threaten to destabilize this vital energy artery of North America. In conclusion, the Vanguard News analysis tonight paints a stark picture, a perfect storm of interconnected global crises, trade wars acting as economic earthquakes, a looming food crisis amplified by geopolitical conflict, and the rising tide of migration driven by desperation. These are not isolated problems. They are intertwined threads in a tapestry of global instability, threatening to unravel the fragile international order we have known. While pinpointing clear winners in such a catastrophic scenario proves elusive, the losers are tragically evident. Vulnerable populations already struggling, developing nations facing economic and social collapse, and the global system as a whole, teetering on the brink of recession and fragmentation. China, with its strategic adaptability, may navigate these turbulent waters more effectively and perhaps even expand its influence in this chaotic new world order. But is a world where one nation's gain comes at the expense of global instability truly a victory for anyone? Is this a zero-sum game we are destined to lose collectively? Ultimately, a fractured, distrustful, and unstable global order serves no nation's long-term interests. The path forward, if there is one, demands a radical shift towards urgent international cooperation. We need a de-escalation of these dangerous trade tensions, not further escalation. We desperately need a concerted, globally coordinated effort to address the unfolding food crisis at its root, ensuring basic human needs are met and preventing further social unrest and mass migration. But is such global cooperation even achievable in our increasingly polarized and nationalistic world? Is the political will there, or are we trapped on a path of escalating conflict and fragmentation? And if political will is lacking at the highest levels, what is our responsibility as informed citizens? Protectionist policies and unilateral actions are not solutions. They are, in fact, accelerants of instability, pushing us closer to the brink. Tonight, your call to action is not just to passively observe, but to actively engage. Stay rigorously informed. Sharpen your critical analysis skills. But go beyond mere analysis. Demand informed, ethical, and globally minded leadership from your elected officials and from the institutions that shape our world. Make your voice heard, not just as consumers or voters, but as global citizens who understand the interconnectedness of our world and the profound dangers of economic nationalism, short-sighted protectionism, and indifference to human suffering. This is not merely a trade war. It is, in essence, a battle for the very future of the global order, a struggle for the soul of international cooperation, and a test of our collective humanity. The well-being of billions, perhaps even the stability of the planet, hinges on how we navigate this crisis. But are we, as a global community, up to the challenge? Are we capable of choosing cooperation over conflict, shared prosperity over narrow nationalism, and a future of stability over the looming threat of chaos? What do you believe is the most crucial step we must take, individually and collectively, to avert the worst-case scenarios we have outlined tonight? For Vanguard News, this is Presenter Name. Thank you for watching. Now, join the crucial conversation below. Share this analysis widely. Become part of the vanguard of informed citizens who are not just watching history unfold, but actively shaping a more just and sustainable future. What are your thoughts? What actions will you take? The future is not predetermined. It is being written now, and your voice, your insights, and your actions are more vital than ever.